Hey, it's Chris, Weirdwood Manor. Let's talk about it. Cooperative style, room spinning, daytime-wise managing, asymmetric abilities going up against bosses that are traversing, trying to take you out. Is it as good as the hype says so far? Let's break it down. What do you need to know to help you figure out whether or not it's right for you? Let's go. So Weirdwood Manor, in case you're not familiar, we are playing a game defending this manor against the various ilks, evils, or demons that are trying to assault it, assail it, take it over, and take out our friend here who owns the manor. And so what we're going to be doing in this game is we're going to be trying to gradually protect her from being taken out, but also fend off said monster here in the first place. This one, in this case, being a chaos ogre, you can see here with the acrylic standee. And so what you do is you take your asymmetric character with their asymmetric decks, their asymmetric powers, you recruit companions, you roll dice to attack, and you slowly take action selection resource management based on the rooms that you're going to traverse in a somewhat vaguely Rondel-esque sense of a timing mechanism that they're utilizing via spinning either the outer ring here, as you can see me doing this, or the inner ring here. And those are the two main things that we're going to be talking about as we break that down and how it works, and as well as I have some concerns about it at the same time. So let's run you through a little bit of what this looks like. Now with this, I actually have more of a mid-game setup here, so you can see a little bit of the actions that you're going to be taking, a little bit of the comboing that you can do, as well as some of the consequences of the ongoings in the game in the first place. So what we've got here in the blown up image is you have the three rings of the board: the outer, the middle, and the inner. And these are your starting areas. And this is also where the days and the times are going to be starting. You can see it numbers 1. And if you look over here, it actually goes up to 12. And why that matters is because as you're taking actions, actions are forcing you then to additionally use up the time. And these are the days, meaning if you get past the 12th day, if you finish the 12th day and you get back up to the first day here on the entrance hall, you lose. That's one lose condition. Your friend, the lady of the manor, if she dies, you also lose. If you can't knock out the bad guy before one of those other lose conditions happens, you also lose. And so then you're going to be counting the portions of the day on this inner ring. And this inner ring matters because, again, it starts here in the morning, and then you're going to be gradually working your way through the 4 phases of the day here. As you can see that I spin it through the nighttime, and then eventually gets back here. And when you get to the arrow, then it tells you that you're going to be shifting the day over here to day 2, and rinse and repeat. Now, the mechanisms of this is actually relatively smooth, and I was really surprised. It actually creates a little bit of a game within a game, a puzzle, if you will, of how you're going to action management strategize on your player board with the cards themselves, as well as these actions. Because when you're taking your set actions, right, you're going to have your starting deck here of a certain number of cards. And again, there are some generic cards that are going to be there, but there are some unique cards to each and every person in how they operate, as well as the complexity of the interactions that you're going to be taking. And so these cards in and of themselves don't have anything to show you of what they're going to be doing during a certain time of day, right? They can be played during any time of the day. The time of the day matters more because you're going to be having these player boards that will have them up at the top. And you have to choose when to play that, because when you play a card, you have to advance at least one space on this inner track to the spot you play it. And so that's why it matters. And so if you're already having a few of these filled at the earlier ones, and you're one of the early ones, you may find yourself not just moving one spot, not just moving 2 spots, moving potentially significantly further. So let's say that I had the daytime one right here. And if the only spot I had left open was the daytime, I would actually have to go all the way around, which would subsequently then advance the day up here by another day just to get it back to where I need it to go. The other thing that you'll notice here that's very, very important, and this is a very tricky aspect, and this is going to be one of the more divisive things, I think, a little bit in a sense, for some people who are looking for pure strategy. You'll notice that when we line up these appropriately, sometimes the rooms connect very easily. You'll notice also that sometimes the rooms do not connect right here, which means traversing between rooms is sometimes going to be limited. The other thing that's going to happen is you see these little scarabs in the room. Scarabs also stop you. You can't take actions in rooms where scarabs are unless you have an ability that says so. And so that is going to limit the movement. And that is probably the biggest emphasis I can put on this game, is that at first it seems like go anywhere, get anything, do stuff really easily. Movement is very limited at times in this game. You have to be very, very judicious with how you're moving, because it's going to matter, and especially in terms of action optimizing those resources that you're going to need to gather to do literally everything else. And you'll notice here as we slide the board over a little bit that there's plenty of resources available. You're getting 2 of the resources here, and you're getting a health point. You're getting either a companion here, or you're getting to refresh a companion. The ones where the scarabs are here right now, you get a resource of any kind, and then you actually get to move the hour back by 1, which is another great thing that you can do just very selectively. Now, this game wouldn't be complete if you didn't have a way to, well, fight off the monster as well as fight off the scarabs. Now, I've told you a little bit of the wing conditions. I've run you through a little bit of the rings. But how are you actually taking a turn so that you can get to fight this Chaos Ogre or one of the other 2 villains that's present in the base game? Essentially, what you're going to do on your turn is you're going to look at your hand of cards, and you're going to have 5 cards in your hand, and you're going to take a look at them, and you're going to take one of them and slot it to the top of the player board, like I mentioned, in the one that you want to do. Now, if you have no slots left at the end of your turn, you actually have to do the Scarab phase, which is actually pretty much like the outbreak phase of pandemic style of this game. And so what you're going to be doing then is you're going to be choosing one of these cards and utilizing either the symbol and the ability down here at the bottom of the card, or you flip it over face down and you can get a generic attack or move ability instead. Because the thing that you run into very quickly, like I mentioned, that some of these characters don't have a lot of moving ability. And so in order to get around, you may have already played all your moving cards, because once you've played your cards and they're stuck out there, or you flip them all out of there into your discard pile, you're going to have to potentially play through almost all of them to get some of the ones back that you're going to need. It gives you just some freedom without being always constrained to just doing what's in your hand and getting completely stuck. Now, the other aspect of these cards that I did not mention is you'll notice in the upper right and upper left-hand corners here, we have symbols. And if you match, a la Kingdom Death Monster, these symbols, and they will complete certain symbols there that you can see, like a shield, you just get that ability as long as these 2 cards are sitting next to each other, next to your player board. And so you can get additional attacks, you can get additional wilds with this one, just ways of getting additional icons, iconography, resources at your disposal without having to do anything different. And these are a lot of different options that you have. Playing this one, for example, where you're drawing 2 cards and then playing one on top of it. So if you don't even have the card you need initially, you can play this one, and you don't also advance the time until you play the second one. So it gives you some options here: Shadow Step, move 2, or teleport to anywhere on your current ring. Now, movement matters, because if you want to move between, say, these areas right here, I can, because there is nothing there. I could stop in this room and I could take this action, which says I get a health, I get one of the book resources, and then somebody else gets a heart or the book resource. Makes sense, right? And then I could take my second move and go elsewhere. And I could go over, well, I could go here to the scarabs, but I would have to stop there. And I can't take the action because the scarabs are in there. Now, if I played that card that I just showed you that had the attack value on it as well, the charge, well, I would have only gotten 1 move in this case, but I would have been able to attack, let's say, if this was all I was going to do from there to there. Now, how you attack in this game is you're going to be on your player board gradually crafting dice, forging dice, if you will, and dice are going to be available to you in the forms of 3 different colors here. The 3 different colors are your blue, your reds, and your blacks, all a different probability of the sides that are on the dice. The black ones are heavy defense, the red ones are heavy attack, and the blue are sort of balanced. And so as you forge them with the resources here, you get to allocate the dice cube to tell you what one that is, and you just have a little spot over here for your other resources, and we'll talk about that in a second. Your asymmetric abilities up here on the right side of the card, which is really nice because they are probably the standout of this game so far in terms of being able to utilize them and being highly overlooked if you actually want to have a chance at winning. You just have to use them, spam them as much as you can, as weird as that sounds. This is not a store up and go game. This is a use it before you lose, essentially. The last thing on this is that you also have these abilities that are going to be able to be used on other people's turns. Love that. Now, the bottom here, you'll see that we have several cubes marking it. And what happens on here is if you get experience, if you beat some of those scarabs, if you deal damage to the monster, you get experience. Other actions on the board, other cards will give you experience, and each experience moves these cubes up one space, and you're gradually going to unlock resources that are going to behoove you. Additional attack value, additional defense value, you heal by 1, or you can deal the monster 2 damage, or you can play somebody else's ability for free when you reach the end of these tracks. And so that's going to be what's going on in a nutshell. Now, how you attack and defend, again, you look at that board and you say, how many dice do I have? Then the scarabs, for example, only roll 1 blue die for each scarab in the room. So you might be fighting more than one scarab. The scarabs also protect the big bads from being attacked. So if there's a scarab in the same room, you have to attack the other ones. You cannot attack them until they're gone. The big bads, however, have something completely different going for them. Let's talk about them for a second. Now, here is the Chaos Ogre's board, and he has 3 different areas that are going to be full of cubes, red cubes. And as you deal damage to him, effects happen when the row is taken out. But if you take out all 3 rows in that section, then he actually loses a black die when he's doing his attack and defenses. And how does he get his dice? Well, depending on what day it is, he goes from being calm, angry to enraged. And this is the day tracker here. And this says, okay, calm in the first 4 days, he only rolls 2 black, a blue, and a red. But then he rolls 2 black, 2 blue, and 2 red on days 5 to 9. That gets mitigated even further because some of the deck cards that you're going to be having for these monsters actually get slotted up here underneath the top as additional powers. And as these go further along, you actually push them out and get slotted further powers to go along with it. Now, an example of this card is the Devious Planning here, as you can see. This is a card here that's going to give you an additional black die if it's on the calm, but also an additional, notice that, not or, but the plus is in between. So an additional red die here if it's on the enraged. And these just get slotted here. When they get involved in a battle, then they all get wiped. But you can have 3 of these out here, and that adds significant detail. The last thing I didn't talk about is the blight condition. For the Chaos Ogre, for example, blight is meaning, and you can see a couple of these rooms here when I zoom out a second, that they're flipped over and they're black, including the one with the Chaos Minotaur, essentially. He looks like a Minotaur to me. Ogre is. And if you ever get 2 scarabs in a room, it causes that room to be blighted. And so blight means that there is a blight tracker. Essentially, it is your outbreak that I mentioned. And if it gets all the way to the end, you lose as well. Makes sense? Makes sense. So you have to knock out all of these guys' health cubes, allowing him to retaliate here, losing strength as he does it, but also blighting because the scarab phase. Now, this is the outbreak actuality. This is the tricky part here. Those action slots that I mentioned. Let me show you a different card here, for example. And I've used Eugene here as the last character I played with. He's different because if you look at the top of his player board here, you can see that each of his 4 slots actually allows you to be any time, anywhere. Basically wilds. So he has that being as his extra special ability, allowing you to do that, which is a great boon. His other cards aren't as strong, but that's an amazing, amazing thing to be dealing with there. So it kind of makes up for it. But why that's important is if you ever fill up all of these slots and in the end of your turn you don't have one open, then you have to pull the cards off to be able to play a card next turn. And you go through the scarab phase. The scarab phase happens, and basically what happens is you look at the scarabs on the board and you say, can this scarab, for example, go out to the next area? If it can, it does. If it can, it does. And then you just work your way from the middle ring to the inner ring, doing the same thing. This scarab can go here. This scarab can go here, if I can actually move it. This scarab gets put over out of sight. And if they can't, they just stay there. But that is also how it happens, because as they gradually go out, for example, this one would go here. Well, this one then has 2 scarabs in it, as you can see. It gets blighted and you have to flip it over, moving one up on the blight track. Now, there is a nice thing is you can unblight, if you will. You can pay a cost and a resource associated with that, get experience, and then flip it back over to its good side, because on the bad side, you can't use the actions there either. And so that's what's going to happen. And all of these are potentially going to move out. Or if they don't move out, well, everything on the inner ring actually gets another scarab. And so you're just slowly filtering out the masses from the center, expanding, and you're going to notice that there's little room each time. Now, this is the other most divisive portion that I mentioned earlier, right? Some of these rooms are going to communicate right here. Some of these rooms right here, for example, aren't going to communicate. And which ones do and which ones don't, and how you're going to be predicting that, you can't. essentially. You're going to have to be alpha gaming, meta gaming this in order to figure that out. Because when you play your card, right? When you play the bad guys card even, the bad guys card tells you exactly how many spaces that you're going to be moving this in the first place. 2, 3, 4. But then, and only then, do you see potentially afterwards where the scarabs are going to be going, or where he is going to be going, or where you will be able to go on your next turn if you're the next person. So it gives some definite tactician strength there, but long-term strategy is very, very difficult with this. And you're going to be having a hard time doing it if that's the style of game that you're looking for with this. Now, the other cool thing that I didn't mention, and this is probably one of the most highly underrated aspects of this I realized in my first game. Companion cards. Companion cards are going to be asymmetric cards that are going to give you powers additionally that you slot next to your board. And you'll notice at the top of these cards as well, there are the same multicolored times of the day, which gives you another ability to slot in that, which means you have one more card that you can lay before you have to do the scarab phase. That becomes very important because the longer you can delay the scarab phase, because it doesn't reset it for everybody. Everybody potentially is going to be doing the scarab phase when they fill up. And so the more of these you have, the better it is. But each time you buy one, the next one is going to cost you 2 more generic resources than what it costs originally. So for example, this one is going to cost you a fire and 2 books. Well, if I want to buy then the Findling here, it's going to cost me 2 fires, a book, and 2 of any other resource. And then if I have both of these down, the next one's going to cost me whatever it would normally cost plus 4 extra resources. I mean, granted, that's 3 other action slots. It's awesome. These also have abilities on them that will cause you to flip them over. So essentially, in order to refresh them, again, you have to do the scarab phase or you have to find that spot on the map. But these are probably the coolest thing apart from these asymmetric abilities that I mentioned earlier, because these are really cool. Let me just show you one, for example. The Tech Talk here. Before the battle, I get to the ability to move this thing, advance time, right, in a bad way for me, to make it harder for me, for less time. But for each spot, up to 4 spaces I move it, I get an additional 1 attack damage on his turn. His secondary ability there, if I choose to do the other one, I can cast it on another player's turn. It freezes the time for their entire turn, and I get victory points, or sorry, I get experience points. That's cool, folks. That's cool. That's the game, though. Going around to these areas, managing the time as it moves around and rotates, and trying to get enough resources, because it escalates very quickly. It escalates very, very rapidly. It does not hold your hand. So let's talk about it for a second. Let's talk pros and cons. Pros, right now. There's 3 monsters. They're all different. Therius is the hardest one. And then you have the Minrath, which is the middle one. The setup is different. How they interact, how they play against each other is different. And the Chaos Ogre is the beginning one. You have, I think, 5 different characters in the base game. I like the powers. The powers are amazing that I just talked about. I really like those. There's probably not enough unique cards in the deck at the same time. But, you know, the cards that are generic have to be generic. Every person is really going to need, let me pull up one of these, Shadow Steps, for example. Everyone has one of these. 2 moves or a teleport to another spot in the ring. Prepared Defenses gives you a defense as well as an additional attack option at the turn. Determined Sprint here. Scarabs don't stop you when you're moving. So, I mean, a couple of these generically, like Charge, are just going to be necessary, and that's fine. I just wish a couple more unique things wouldn't be the worst either. The rooms, it's a completely random setup, right? Like if I take this one off here, for example, you know, you're setting it up completely different. You could swap these and, you know, you'd never know that this was the way it was. And you actually have a couple cards that will allow you to do that in the game. Same thing with the outer rim and same thing with the inner rim as well. So all 3 of those allow for highly adaptable modularity without changing a whole lot. And you know what? I was a little skeptical about this turning thing. It actually works. It keeps track of things relatively nicely. And I wasn't finding it difficult to use or understand whatsoever. So you can see, again, just how easily it turns, especially as a prototype. So that's cool. Boss guys, I was really worried about this one. When they get wiped after a battle, though, it's nice. Because they also, as you can imagine, really scale up in some of their dice right here with some of the farther along in the games. I mean, you're going to be tough dealing damage at some of these with 4 black dice, for example, in that one. that's just what you got to be aware of. The difficulty is there, and you can get easily screwed, like with a lot of these pandemic-esque cooperative luck style driven games. And so this one is no different in the sense that there is a lot of luck with that of what card from the enemy deck you're drawing, because they're going to be moving, they could be attacking, they could be placing scarabs, which you get when, sometimes just completely out of your control, and it might be exactly the right one at the right time, it could be exactly the wrong one at the wrong time. So take that for what you will. The experience track, again, at the bottom of the cards, it's nice. It gets you additional couple resources. It's not overwhelming. I like the dice forging. I like the ability to customize your character asymmetrically. That's a very good feature. Health is less important because you can't go down to 1. You just start losing cards when you take more damage or losing some other resources. So that's not as big a thing in this game, and that's maybe a little bit of a detriment if we're going to talk about the cons here. The other con is this game could be a lot longer at the 3 and 4 player counts, right? The 2 player counts are going to be definitely like an hour to 75 minutes easily. The 3 or 4 could easily run you up to 2 hours depending on how slow or how ponderous your players are in terms of planning out their actions. Now, again, it's going to depend on your group, but, these villains are not fast to fight. They're just not. And that's what you got to be aware of. The other big pro, I like the companions. The companions are probably the other best thing apart from the asymmetric abilities because they're so unique. They're giving you different options than what's in your hand. They're giving you different options than what's on the asymmetric abilities. And they're giving you ways to get some of the cool powers that your other people have. I can play other people's powers, or I can use a power that I never had access to, or that's never in the game elsewhere. Or I can get additional defense or attacks with some manipulation and or experience each time I play one of these as well, and it gives you the additional action slots so that you don't have to risk the scarab turns as well. That's probably the biggest boon of these as a whole and why it works so well. Cons, again, this is very luck driven. This is very non-Euro-esque. So if you're looking for something that on the cooperative side of things, if you're looking for more of a Spirit Island even, this is not going to appease you. Again, the other thing that you have to be aware of is these scarabs get spawned a ton, especially when you're starting to knock off health from the enemies, especially if you're running through that enemy deck. And so because you can't attack the big guy where he's spawning stuff, and because you're only getting to play 1 card per turn and you don't have many cards that are going to be move and attack, you only can attack on 1 turn and you don't attack everybody in there. You only attack the scarabs instead. So that got a little frustrating on a couple of the games we played just because, he put down a scarab, I'd fight it. Put down a scarab, the next person would fight it. Put down a scarab, then fight the scarab. And so like 3 or 4 turns went by before I was even able to get to this guy to be able to do some damage. And when I'm sitting right on him, right, I'm just sitting here with like 2 people. The lady is also sitting there and she gives you 2 extra additional attack, and I'm just not being able to use it. And I'm having to risk her also taking damage because if he pulls one of his attack cards, he just damaged to her, and then, she dies and I lose. So again, the dynamic is there. It's a little bit of push your luck in that sense as well. The rooms are varied enough, but there definitely are some rooms that you're going to go stronger towards. When the resources really start to matter a little bit less towards the end game, some of the other rooms were giving you 2 or 3 resources, or some of the cards that give you 2 or 3 resources to burn one of them, they're just become less important. Now that's also why, putting them face down becomes a little bit more important to get that additional move or attack option. But again, like it's resource heavy in some of these areas, or it's discard a card to teleport. Well, if I go here, why don't I just go somewhere else, for example, instead of going to this card? Am I better off going to this one where I discard a card and teleport anywhere? Or am I better off just using a move action with a card face down and so it's a little bit of, I just hope that all of these are well balanced. And to be honest with you, I don't have enough plays to know if some of these rooms are a little bit underpowered or some of them are just not going to be utilized as much. That would be my big fear. Because you've got so many, because you've got about a dozen in each ring, except for the inner one, which only has 6, that's just something that I can't speak to. But a few more here and there of little things, a few more maybe asymmetric cards, a few more asymmetric companions, another boss or 2, and the base game is well worth it. I mean, I don't have any qualms about saying that. I mean, it's a solid game, but it's heavier-esque. The rulebook is a little bit more of a slog than, say, a cooperative pandemic or the loop, if you will, is the other standard bearer for me. And it's going to go longer. It's going to go longer than any of those as well. And so if you want something a little bit lighter, this one's going to have more strategy in general of how you're going to manage those resources, but there's also going to be a lot of tactical nature in the randomness of how the rooms are going to be aligned, how many rooms you can move through, the scarab rolls, because I didn't even mention that sometimes you're just going to be placing scarabs. You roll 2 dice, it tells you which ring to put it in, and then it tells you what number to line it up with in terms of where it's going. And sometimes you just put one in a room that doesn't have one, and sometimes you put one in a room that has 2 now, and it gets blighted just by the only one even that had the chance of doing that, and that can kind of screw you. So it's kind of like the loop in that sense, when you're dropping the cubes down the center, and it just sometimes all lands in the wrong one. So yeah. So what do I think? Final thoughts on all? I mean, I'm relatively impressed, actually. I was really concerned when I read through this rule book. Again, like, I'm sitting at the kitchen table, and my wife is going, "Honey, are you okay? Is something wrong with the game?" Because I'm sitting there going, oh man, this rulebook is a little bit denser than I expected, right? But then I got it playing. And once I got it playing, it was a lot smoother than I expected too. And I really think this action selection at the top of the board, lining up with the times of the day, of forcing you when and where and how to move that, is really good. I think the room situation is also terrific. If you can make enough variety with these enemies and not make the difficulty too much. I mean, that's the other thing I can see this, is at the higher difficulties. I mean, I had not a rough time with this first guy, the first time I played him, but it definitely took, probably 3 or 4 days worth of time within the game to get a sense of, this is what I have to do. Oh, geez, things are escalating. Because it's like, oh yeah, by the way, don't ignore blight. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm on 5 blight and I'm on day 3, right? So of 8 blight and 12 days. So it's just something like that you got to get the swing of. Because I could also see, if these guys are much harder, like, I could see it being a real difficulty problem. The other thing that I have to say is just with some of the cards that I mentioned, right? These cards with these symbols at the upper top here that give you additional bonuses. I'll be completely honest, I did not find them useful in most of the games we played. I just found myself being more concerned about the ability or the slot that they were in, not trying to match the slots up so I got the additional one, together there. And so it just didn't seem as important. It was like, oh, I accidentally got one. I accidentally got the bonus. It wasn't ever me trying to get the bonus in that way. And so that's the one thing I'd say is maybe just a little bit too much going on in that way. I think you could be without that, and at least at the lower level difficulties, not miss it. Maybe it's a lot higher. I didn't play the highest level difficulty guy yet. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's going to be really, really necessary there, but I didn't feel like it was necessary. The other thing I could see going on later in like an expansion or something like this is, the ability to buy a card from a deck, buy a card from a market, and say, get rid of one of the ones in your deck that you're just going in this round, in this game, in this scenario. It's just not as useful, especially with the way my character is built and the characters I'm playing with. To give you a little bit more customization there, that wouldn't be the worst thing either, that I wouldn't mind seeing in the future as well if they did something else like that down the line. So there you go. All in all, yeah, very, very solid. Very, very happy with this from a Cooperative game stance. So I can see why it's doing as well as it is on crowdfunding. So there you go, Greyridge Games, Weirdwood freaking Manor. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns down below. Check them out. Thanks for watching. Stay classy. Peace out. See you around.